Hi guys and welcome to TechFurb. Today we will be reviewing the GTX 670 right here. Absolutely. I know it's going to... So, this GPU right here is rather appropriate for this time. Now, if you've gone shopping for a graphics card in the last probably 4 months, you'll have gotten a bit of a shock. You can't buy a graphics card. It started in America, in the US, and supply was really bad there. It was still okay here in Australia, so they were complaining they couldn't get cards or whatever. Prices were ridiculous at scalpers, yada, 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 yada. Here in Australia, it was fine. That was in November. I bought my RTX 2060 in November for $500 and I reviewed it. Said it was a great graphics card. If you need a graphics card, buy it now because you don't know when 3060s, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, long story short, I could not have imagined that you wouldn't be able to buy a graphics card now. But the reality is, if you go on any e-tailer in Australia right now, you cannot buy a new graphics card. Your options are a GT 1030 for $150 Australian dollars. They are not worth that much. Or you have to pay 900 Australian dollars for a maybe if you're lucky, 3060. To be honest, they're around $1,000. It's ridiculous. 2060s have come back in stock. They're 800 Australian dollars. They launched at that price 2.5 years ago. It's insane. So, all of that in mind, that is where this guy right here comes in. It's an old graphics card. You can buy it on Gumtree, on Facebook Marketplace, anywhere like that. Secondhand, they're about $100. If you're lucky, $50. If you're unlucky, $150. They're not that expensive. And for the most part, they are still capable of running games. But the question is, a graphics card like that has a big problem. And the problem it has is it has a 2 gig VRAM buffer. Now, the reason why that matters is if you've played any modern game in the last 2 or so years and you've had a 2 gig graphics card, you're in for a world of hurt at 1080p or higher. That's how it is. So, what I will be doing in this video today is I will be examining if this graphics card right here that costs, a reasonable amount of money. You can buy it on the second-hand market. There are out there. There's models, while it might not be a 670, it might be a 680, might be a 760, 770, doesn't matter. Old, cheap graphics cards with 2 gigs of VRAM. Can you game on these at 1080p? That's what we're going to answer today. So, without further faffing around, let's jump into some benchmark charts. So, let's jump into the first benchmark. Now, for reference, we are doing 12 games. Now, the CPU used for the benchmarking was my Ryzen 3 3300X. Yes, I do have one of those. It is paired with two 8GB DIMMs, so 16 gigs of DDR4 3200 memory. And to be honest, that is always going to be bottlenecked by GTX 670. They're very fast CPU, very fast RAM, way better than that graphics card needs. But it does tell you what sort of performance you can expect from the 670 in the best case scenario. So let's dive into the benchmarks. CSGO. Now, CSGO is a really good showing for the 670. We are using a 10100F i3 paired with a GTX 1080 as a reference point. Now, what I will say is all of the benchmarks were run at 1080p high. However, when the 670 couldn't run games at that spec, I did go 1080 low and 720 low if it required it. Now, let's jump in. So, CSGO. 226 on average is the benchmark from the 1080, and we are getting 184 from the 670, so a really good showing. 103, 76 on the lows, but buttery smooth, very good experience, which you would expect from a 670, given that CSGO is quite an old game and it's an esports title, so we expect it to do well here. We go from the searing success to the absolute failure. We're going to CyberPunk 2077, and yeah, 670 cannot run this game at 1080p. So, even a 1080 can't hit 60 FPS, so in fairness to the 670, it's a poorly optimized game. Sorry, CD Projekt Red, but it just didn't optimize it well. 70 high, 12 FPS on average, so absolutely unplayable. If you drop it down to 1080 low, it goes to 22 frames per second, but still, it was very juddery. It didn't feel right. When I dropped it down to 720p low, we did get 30 frames per second on average. It did jitter, it did stutter, but it was a playable experience and it didn't make me feel sick on that instance. So, if you are desperate to play Cyberpunk and all you can get is a 670, you're going to be playing it at 720p low, and to be honest, the graphical experience is not that great at that resolution. It just doesn't look good. But if you want to play it, technically you can. And I guess that's good enough for what you can do right now. It's better than playing no games, I guess. Dirt Rally 2.0, a little bit fairer on the 670 now, and our benchmark is 154 on average by the eternity. We are getting 47 on average, 38 and 36 is the 1% and 0.1% lows. Now, I know they're not high numbers, but to be honest, when I was doing the benchmark run, it was fine. It felt smooth. I've had much better experiences, don't get me wrong. I was wishing for my RTX 2060 in that case. But if you need a graphics card and you want to play Dirt Rally 2.0, you can do it with a GTX 670. Doom Eternal. And I was very, very shocked at this. We went from 188 frames per second on average on the 1080, and it was a hard failure for the 670. It could not run the game at 1080p high settings. The game would not let it run it. I had to drop it to 1080p low, and oh boy, I've never played Doom Eternal and had a jittery experience. That game is buttery smooth, but I'll tell you what, this time it wasn't. 32 on average, 21 and 19. It was playable, but it started, it jittered, and it didn't feel right. Doom's a game that needs to feel fast and flowing, and the 670 can't provide that experience at 1080p. If you drop it down to 720p, the experience does improve, but it is not an optimal experience still. However, again, when your choice is no games or this, I'll give it a pass. It's not great, but technically it can do it. Just don't expect a great experience. That's what I will say. Next is F1 2019, and this is a much better improvement for the 670. It nearly hit 60 FPS at 1080p high. Very well done. As I said, 2 gig VRAM buffer. That is amazing. It's nearly hitting 60 FPS. And again, just like Dirt Rally, it felt buttery smooth. It was a good experience. On a 1080p 60Hz monitor, I really couldn't tell you the difference between that and like a 1080 or 2060 or whatever. So yeah, great showing. I didn't bother doing low or 720 because it just didn't need to. Next is GTA 5. Now, GTA 5 is a game I would expect this graphics card to run because it is an older game. GTA 5 technically was released in 2015, but realistically it was released on the PlayStation 3 in 2013. I would expect this graphics card being from around that era to run it, and it does. 47 on average. Experience, good enough for me. It's not jittery, not stuttery, plays the game, that's all you can ask. So, I'm happy with it. Let's move on. Anno 1800. This game ran well. It's a game that actually depends more on CPU than it does on GPU. But at 1080p high preset, we managed 59 frames per second on average, which I was pretty happy with. The 1% and 0.1% were a little bit lower, but again, it's a CPU intensive game, and it judders, it hitches, it stutters occasionally on pretty much any CPU I've used. And the 670 keeps up. So if you want to run Anno 1800, GTX 670 has got you covered. We come to our first DNF, or rather DNS, did not start. It cannot run Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which, that sucks. but for reasons, Ubisoft has required that the title runs at DirectX 12, and the 670, I think, had DX12 backported to it, but it was done in a kludgy way and it doesn't work properly. But it just straight up will not run Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So we're going to move on. Game on launch, man. Can't do anything about it. Okay, back to a bit more optimism. Far Cry New Dawn. It's well off the 1080 in this instance, but it is getting 34 on average, 28 and 25. Not where I want it to be at 1080p high, but I don't expect it to be there at 1080p high. That is very strenuous on an old graphics card like this. When you drop it down to low, 42, 35, 34, and while those numbers aren't high, they're very smooth, and the gameplay experience is smooth. There's no jittering, there's no stuttering. It feels nice, it feels flowing. You're not getting the high fidelity or the high frame rate experience that you would like from a high-end card, but that's not why you're buying this card. You're buying it to play games, and it can play this game just fine. And if you really want to get above 60 FPS, well, you can go down to 720p, but it looks terrible. Ghost Recon Breakpoint just crashed when I ran 1080p high. It would not run on high settings, which again, to be expected, modern game, high textures, yada yada yada. However, when you dropped it to 1080p low, you did get 45 and 34 and 22 as the lows. It was a little bit stuttery and a little bit jittery. So I'm gonna say that don't run this game at 1080p, or run it at 1080p with the expectation you're gonna get the odd stutter and jitter. But it does run it. However, if you do drop it down to the 720p, it runs it a lot better. It's a little bit smoother, a little bit nicer, but again, you lose all the graphical fidelity and it looks like PS3 graphics. So it's up to you what you want to do. Watchdogs Legion. This was a game that I expected to absolutely hammer the 670 because it is one of the newest titles in this lineup, but shockingly, it ran 1080p high. It did not run it well, and it did stutter, and it did jitter. I dropped it to 1080p low, and it still jutted and jittered and was not happy. So, I went all the way down to 720p low, and we got a playable result. Didn't look great, but it was playable. So, there's that. Okay, last but not least, it's actually a little bit of an older title now, Battlefield 5, but it is a game that is still intensive to run. It was quite hard to run when it came out, and it still bloody is. 1080p high, it struggles, it jitters, it judders, it doesn't like it. If you go 1080p low, it gets a bit better and the experience is a bit more smooth. And to be honest, it's quite playable actually, to be honest, at 1080p. And then if you go right down to 720p, then the frame rate comes right up near 60. So, that is the gaming benchmarks. It's a little bit all over the place, so I'll give you a nice, neat ball conclusion. So, this card right here. Should you buy a GTX 670 in 2021? The answer to that question is, it depends. If you have no other option, if you cannot buy a new graphics card, or you cannot afford to spend more than $150 on a graphics card, it will do. It's not great. As you saw, it doesn't run Assassin's Creed at all, so if you want to play that game, well, don't even bother with this graphics card. If you're wanting to run things like CyberPunk or any really latest gen titles, anything that's graphically intensive with really high resolution textures, this card is going to struggle. You're going to have to run it at lower resolutions and you're going to lose the graphical fidelity. Now for me, I've been a bit spoiled. I've had 2060s and 1080s and nice graphics cards around for a little while. So my opinion will be tainted. I have an expectation that it's going to look nice. And it just does not look nice on the 670 because you have to lower the graphical settings so low and even start lowering resolutions. To be honest, if you can run a game at 1080p low, it looks fine. But if you have to drop resolution, that's when it starts looking really, really bad. So the reality is I wouldn't buy this card if I had other choices. If you can find a 770, a 780, 780 Ti, you're probably not going to find one of those, but work with me. A 960, even a 950 would be a bit better. 950 up in the 900 series, and hell, if you find any 10 series that's a 1050 or up, jump on it. But 670, it's getting old, and the VRAM buffer really, really holds it back. I don't know if they made larger VRAM capacity, so if there's like a 3 gig or a 4 gig model, which I don't think there is, but if there is, it would actually be not too bad, because it's not the GPU that lets it down, it's the VRAM. It's a bloody VRAM bottleneck on this card that just ruins it. NVIDIA always underspecs its VRAM, and it drives me nuts. So there it is, folks. It's a tough time, and the fact that you have to consider a GPU like this to even run a game is quite ridiculous. And yes, it runs games, so yes, if you are desperate, you can need to buy it, just buy the bloody thing. Worst case, it's $100. You can flip it for $50 or whatever. You're not out too much money. That's where I'm at with it. And as a side note, if you are watching this in normal times when you don't have to buy crappy old graphics cards that are 8 years old and have low VRAM or whatever, and you're buying a new graphics card, make sure you get as much VRAM as you can on a graphics card, because regardless of what reviewers say, yes, you could buy a graphics card with 6 gig of VRAM right now and it will be faster than the one with 8 gig of VRAM. In 3 years' time, that is not going to be the case. The card with 8 gigs of VRAM is going to be better because it can still run games. So, rant over, video over. I'm a little frustrated, a little all over the place with this one. This graphics card is definitely on its last legs, but that's the state of affairs, people. So, if you like this video, give it a like. If you disliked it, you can do that. Comments down below if you've got any questions for me. There is the Discord, which is in the links in the video description. I'm more likely to respond to a comment in the Discord than I am in the YouTube channel, just because I get that many these days that I can't keep up. And if you like these videos, I'm trying to get back on a two weekly release schedule. I've been off the boil for a long time, but I'm back on it. I'm feeling the passion, I'm feeling the drive. I've one-taked this whole video. So yeah, get subscribed, hit the notification bell, so you do get notified when the new videos come out, and I will catch you guys in the next video.